So this is my first official video, and right now in the quarter, I'm in about 2 weeks left, the final week of learning and class, and then the week after that is finals. 3 papers, 3 classes, and this is my first year still. First year, second quarter, if that makes sense. And if you're at a school that does a quarter system, you'll understand. But yeah, and I've been in Pearland, Texas for about, March now, 7 months or so. And yeah, I think a part of that journey with school and with being a pastoral resident here is just getting used to the area, getting used to the context, not in an abstract sense, but in a real sense. Finding friends, community, that's been a really big desire for my heart when I moved down here, because I left, friends and community where I came from in Chicago. And so it was a big life change. And as I'm learning these new things, especially in my more missiological classes, one of the classes you might take here at Fuller is called Living Missiologically. I just took a class previous quarter called Practical Theology. And there's these similar themes that come up a lot in those 2 classes of context and the importance of it, the importance of knowing it, and the importance of knowing your own context and why your theology and your beliefs and your values and the way you speak and think, how all those are kind of factors that play into why you think the way you do, why certain theology makes sense to you and why certain theology doesn't, and maybe how you preach, maybe how you teach, maybe how you think about God, maybe how you think about Jesus, how you think of your place in the world, and not even just theologically, but politically, socially, economically, relationally. You can name it. And that's not to say there's no such thing as individual autonomy. I'm a person, I'm an individual. I made an individual choice to move from home to Chicago and from Chicago to here. And so my life experiences and the context I'm around are going to be different than maybe my parents who didn't move to Chicago, to Texas, to so on and so forth. And so kind of keeping those things in mind as an individual is really helpful personally, especially as I'm experiencing it real time, but also moving it forward to say, okay, this happens to me, and how does this affect everybody else? And not just everybody else as individual people, but how does this affect whole communities who build cultures, and build, whether they know it or not, or take cultures from different areas and bring it in. I'm at a church right now, and the church has a culture. Every church, every building, every place, everything has a culture. If there's people in it, there's culture. And some culture's really good, some culture's really bad, and that, me saying that is a very black and white way of putting it that comes from my culture, right? And there's culture that is maybe a better way to say healthy and unhealthy in terms of, is it healthy when it comes to having new people? Is it unhealthy when it comes to having new people? Is it unhealthy when it comes to how it holds its beliefs and values? Or is it very healthy? And how do we determine health and unhealth? That, again, is culturally conditioned in the way I'm talking about it. So you bring this cycle down, and it can feel very overwhelming and kind of off-putting of just I can never, what is truth? What is the right and wrong? And that sort of thing. But I think we're missing the point if we start moving in that direction, because nonetheless, we all are trying to find what's right and what's wrong. And there are cultural conditions which really work and which really don't. And I don't need to give any practical examples, but they're kind of obvious, aren't they? Moving down here, there's a different expectation when it comes to being at church, being a person, hanging out, communicating. This church here is very, very communal and much more small and close-knit than maybe the church I came from. That doesn't mean the church I came from wasn't communal, but they're communal in a different way. And so there's different expectations, different values, different beliefs, and a lot of them are unsaid. And so it's kind of the process of experiencing it real time of, oh wow, I'm in a new context, I'm in a new place, weather, geography, food. Oh my gosh, Houston, Texas, so much different types of food. And I'm coming from Chicago, which had a bunch of different other types of food. And so you have this difference, but also similarities. Big cities, right? If you're familiar, Chicago is the 3rd largest city in America, and Houston's 4th. And Houston's on Chicago's tail when it comes to population size and growth. But nonetheless, there's similarities and there's differences. And how they affect me personally is one thing. And that's something I'm experiencing real time. Maybe I'm missing home and I'm missing these things about Chicago or the Midwest that Texas doesn't have, or vice versa. I found new things and new ways of living And part of that is because of the weather. Something as simple as that. The weather changes how people live and act and interact. And so it's one of those things that as you're going into seminary, as you're going into a new position in anything, but specifically seminary, this kind of difference in culture kind of comes into play. And I think that's something that's really important to realize. And I think a really special thing about Fuller specifically, I don't know about other seminaries, but Fuller specifically has such a huge heart for cultural diversity. And not just for the sake of diversity, but for the sake of growth, of communal growth. That we can learn from each other and our different theological backgrounds, the diverse theological backgrounds of people in my cohort or my class. It's just really special, and it's something that challenges me and encourages me as well. And knowing we can have conversations about really big issues and topics, whether it's political or theological, in the world, and there's a mutuality of respect and agreeance. Even when people get really heated or flustered, or we learn something in class that really challenges someone's underlying theological beliefs, there's what I've noticed here at Fuller, and that's all I can speak on, of course, as a Fuller student. There's a really amazing way of which the cohort kind of forms around people, and we talk about it. We can create space to talk about it and give each other space to respond and discuss, and allow people not to feel alone in, feeling these sorts of ways. And we all come from different backgrounds, right? Different contexts and different theological contexts. And having that in mind is really helpful when entering seminary. Because someone might be offended, or theological belief might be challenged, whereas someone else, they're like, oh, I have no problem with this new idea or this thing. I've heard this before, or even if I haven't, it doesn't bother me. And so how does that happen? How do we talk about that? How do we discuss that? And how does a person who doesn't have any issue with what's being taught in class or what's being said by another student approach that? And I'm not talking about like crazy heretical things. I'm talking more of open air questions, of seeking truth, and seeking truth communally together with a bunch of different people. And so that pursuit of truth, that pursuit of what is God doing in the world, what is God doing in our midst, what is God doing here in Houston and wherever else people are coming from, those are tough questions. And if we assume that us as individuals can answer that, we're assuming incorrectly. And so I think it's a beautiful thing that seminary, specifically Fuller, emphasizes in its practice and its classes, right? Emphasizing context, the importance of it, and knowing it, but also in its very practice too, in the way our cohorts, our classes are made up, and the way we experience the city as a whole. So I think that's really helpful, kind of a helpful framework when entering seminary, and just any new place in general, traveling if you travel across the country and move, just something to keep in mind, especially as you're pursuing community and pursuing it, and you have a desire to find community, find friends, find people, and realizing that each place has its own underlying things and values. And I don't know all of Pearland's or Houston's. I don't. And I didn't know all the Chicago's. And when you're in big cities like that, there's so much going on, and there's so much different areas that it's impossible to know it all. But that's a beautiful thing. It's a journey. It's a lifelong experience of getting to know a community and a group of people and friends for the rest of your life. And hopefully learn more about them, and those learning more about them helps you reflect on learning more about yourself, and vice versa. There's almost a reciprocity kind of thing. And again, that's a really helpful framework for me, at least, looking back at the beginning of seminary, to kind of come in with that reciprocity of like, people are going to learn from me and my experiences, and it's going to help them, and people's experiences and theological knowledge and context are going to help me. And there's almost this reciprocal kind of nature. And I'm not going to get into it in this video, but this reciprocal nature of one's learning from their context, whether it's new or old, and they're teaching it kind of thing, there's this reciprocal nature where there's not necessarily this power imbalance, right? But it's this reciprocity that actually ushers in, maybe ushers in isn't the right word, but it gives space for the Holy Spirit to move in the midst of people with very different views and values in a context. And this is really resonant in missions. And so in my living missiologically class, in my practical theology class I took last quarter, this really comes into play, of this idea of what's called praxis, which in practical theology we talk about is this idea of reflection, action, reflection, where you're kind of moving between the two, and you start with action and you reflect on that action, and vice versa. You don't just do something and don't think about it. You don't just reflect and never do anything. It's this repetitive, reciprocal oscillation event going on. And it's not just for individuals, but for a community, such as a community like a church. How is it best to respond to the needs of the community outside the church, the area we're situated in, the specifics and specific needs? And all that comes with learning and being able to listen really well. And so all these things play into much larger capacities than we realize. And it starts just listening well. And it starts with an openness to understand that I don't have all the answers. And actually, one of the things I've learned as I've been in college is the more I learn, the less I know. But the things I do feel like I know, I feel like I know really well. And the patterns are reaffirmed again. And so there's this approach that anyone, and I'm not saying I do the best with this, but this approach to life and this approach to missions, this approach to just communities as well, it's just these people have something to teach me. Anybody does, because they're not me, they're different than me, and so there's something I could learn from them. And that sounds really nice in theory, but in practice it's really hard. And so this video is just kind of a summary and maybe a rant, if you will, of that experience of experiencing a new context and learning in real time what it's like to learn and to learn more about myself and my own contexts and values, and which ones I thought were normative, like these ones are just true, these ones are just obvious, duh, this is the way it works, and realizing, oh, maybe that's not the way it works, always, forever, everywhere. Maybe that was something that was conditioned in me. It might still be true, but it might not be as normative as I thought. And so there's the humility that comes with that. That's who we see in the person of Jesus, right? A humble man who came with truth, with the power of God, with the power of the Holy Spirit, right? But now that question is, will we come with that humility as well?